What does your family mean to you? Are they just people you surround yourself with for your convenience? Do you love them, or do you just like them? What I'm trying to say is that you're the kind of person who has a dream primarily for yourself, and others are just filling in the blanks. Is your job in the first place for you, and is family more of a hobby? I've asked too many questions that a person needs to answer. Some of you will really have to think about this before you give a true opinion. Others will respond to this immediately, but they will know that they are lying to themselves. And there will also be people like me who will not hesitate to tell you that my family comes first. My children and grandchildren are above everything in my life. They are the only reason for my existence. They are the sun, moon, and stars for me. I would literally give them my last shirt, without even asking for their consent to do so. I would give my last dollar to any of them for their frivolous whim. I would gladly make do with only the essentials so that any of them can enjoy luxury. You may have noticed that my wife is not included in my statement above. Once, 20 years ago, I had a wife. No, she's not dead, at least not physically. We weren't even divorced. It would have upset my children. We continue to coexist in the same house, in the same conditions as we have had for more than 40 years. The children don't know anything about the rift that happened between my wife and me, and more importantly, she doesn't know anything either. Maybe you think I'm talking nonsense. I continue to love my family, except for my wife, and pretend that everything is fine. Why would a sane person do such a thing? All my 3 children love their mother, and to tell them something that is indelibly imprinted in my mind would be to belittle her in their eyes. I just love them too much to affect their happiness in any way, even to the detriment of myself. Do you want to call me a wimp? Call me a coward. That's bullshit. What I've been doing for the last 20 years is protecting my children. It was a harder feat than you can imagine, much harder than any form of torture ever invented by man. My name is Charlie, and I have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. They are everything to me. The oldest, Rob, will soon turn 40. Billy is 37, and my baby Judy has just turned 33. Thanks to them, I have 8 beautiful, wonderful grandchildren, and I would gladly give my life for any of them. I've been keeping this secret inside of me for almost 20 years. The woman who was once my life and my only love is Sally. I'm telling you this now because I only have a few days or hours left. The doctor tells me it won't hurt. Sally and I once had what you would call a perfect marriage. We met right after graduating from college, and I had a great job as an aspiring architect. Sally was in real estate, and she loved what she was doing. I saw her for the first time in a restaurant. For me, it was love at first sight. Looking back, I realized that it took her a little longer to say that she loves me. I invited her to the cinema. That's how it was done back then. We dated for several months, and I finally had the courage to ask her to marry me. We got married 6 months later at the church where her family went. Hawaii was the place where we spent our honeymoon and learned about the physical side of loving each other. We spent a great week in the sun and spent hours exploring each other's bodies. Our newlywed life was happy. We worked to save money for a house, and we loved each other. Sally did her job very well and found us a lovely home that we couldn't afford. We bought it with difficulty, vowing to work harder and cut costs for what we didn't need. We no longer ate out and took our lunches to work. I worked harder than I've ever worked in my life, and it quickly paid off. Soon I was promoted, and now we could easily afford this house. When we first bought a house, we started spending time together doing things we didn't have to spend money on. For example, take long walks and have picnics. We enjoyed this time so much that we continued to be humble and spent time together even afterwards, enjoying each other. The money we earned was spent on the house. We worked like dogs to make it beautiful, where we could raise our family and grow old together. The day Sally told me she was expecting our first child, I couldn't have been happier or more proud. All my prayers have been answered. Sally's belly was growing every day, as was my love for her. We continued to live the way we lived, preferring to spend time, not money, on children and on ourselves. Don't get me wrong, we had everything we needed. We just felt that it was more important to do something together, as a family, than for the children to have all the latest toys. By doing almost everything in the team, we tried to instill family values in our children. They were taught to distinguish right from wrong in their own way, with love. The church has been a big part of our lives. Not because we were fanatics, but we wanted the children to believe in a higher power. By attending services every Sunday with the whole family and taking part in all walks and picnics, our life was happy. At the age of 43, I was injured on a construction site when I was inspecting a building that we were building. I was hit by a falling piece of metal beam, and my back turned into a mess. The doctors put me back together from pieces, and I spent more than 3 months in the hospital, praying every day that I can recover and provide for my family. It took me a long time to learn how to walk and move around on my own. The pain was terrible, so I took a lot of painkillers. The pain either subsided, or I was just getting used to it. It took a while to wean myself off illegal substances, but eventually I took control of my life. I used a mild form of muscle relaxant for relief. I was able to function normally most of the time, so I went back to work. My family life was pretty normal back then, considering my physical limitations. The only problem was that the drugs made me impotent. Making love to my wife has always, and I really mean always, been wonderful and frequent. It was one of the things we discovered early in our marriage that we could do to entertain ourselves for free when we were in financial difficulties. We loved each other and enjoyed an active life before my accident. The only positive result that we suffered at work was the huge settlement check that we received. My children's education was provided, and I would have had enough money left for early retirement. Money was, of course, not as important as my health, but as the days passed, it seemed to return. Our life got better again. I could keep up with work and my family. Everything fell into place except making love to my wife. It's been over a year since we made love. Imagine, if you will, going from 5 or more times a week to 0. It must have been very difficult for Sally, but it wasn't easy for me either. Not only was I pressured by the fact that I was celibate, but I also felt guilty for not being able to please my wife. Unfortunately, all the doctors told me that as long as I take medication, my situation will not improve. Well, I said to hell with it, and that same day I threw the pills in the trash. If I have to live with the pain to resume what we once had, so be it. I didn't tell Sally about my decision because she wouldn't have agreed to it. Sally always told me that the most important thing was my health. Based on past experience, it will take some time for the chemicals to finally leave my body. My company sent me to Toronto for a week of meetings on a new building that my firm was designing. I left early on Sunday morning and expected to be home the following Saturday afternoon. By Monday, I felt my lower back muscles twitching. It was a good sign that the effects of the drugs were ending. Despite the cramps, my meetings went well. I called home every evening to talk to my wife and children, as usual, when I was away on business. There was never anything new in these conversations. Just the same conversations about how things were going at school and how we all miss each other. The usual routine stuff, but I loved hearing all the details of my family's life. My meetings ended that evening a day earlier. I was too excited to stay another minute, so I changed my booking and was supposed to be home the next morning around 11. All the kids should be at school, and Sally and I could spend the day together. On the way home, I thanked God for making me a whole person again. I took a taxi from the airport. There was little traffic, and I got home around 10:30. Well, you can all guess what might have happened, and you'll be right. I experienced the greatest shock of my life when I quietly went upstairs to surprise Sally. Our reverend from our own church was vigorously comforting one of his parishioners in my bed. There can be no feeling worse than the one I was experiencing at that moment. I wanted to rush in there and kill them both. They continued, and I couldn't take it anymore. I backed out of the bedroom. The shock of seeing my wife, with whom I have lived for 20 years, lift her legs for another man, almost killed me. As for me, my first thought was the children and how they would live with this knowledge. This thought struck me so strongly that I decided to quietly leave the house to have some time and think about everything carefully. I rented a hotel room for the night. 2 things immediately came to my mind. There was no more love for the woman I married. She killed that feeling in me today, and I lost faith in God. Just look at what that insensitive bastard did to me. To hell with Sally, to hell with God, and to hell with his messenger. My mind was in turmoil, but I had to make a decision about which direction to follow. By divorcing Sally, the children would have learned about their mother's actions. Was this the best solution? No, their happiness means more to me than anything in the world. I couldn't do that to them. I already knew what she had done, so nothing could be changed now. It was my burden that I had to carry. No one would share my grief. Of course, Sally knew what she had done. Will she feel guilty? Will she confess her adultery and ask for forgiveness? The emotions inside her that caused her to break her vows to me will most likely not allow her to risk telling me. She knows perfectly well how I feel about adultery. Believe me, the next day, when I entered my house, I was overcome by a feeling of loneliness. I made the decision to stay married to a woman I couldn't stand the sight of anymore. It was supposed to be an Oscar-worthy acting performance. I didn't have to pretend to be tired when I got home. I didn't sleep a wink last night. I kissed Sally on the cheek and asked her if it would be a problem if we talked later. I went to my den and closed the door, staying there in seclusion until lunch. At dinner, my mood was very depressed. I tried to pay attention to what the children were saying and answer all their questions about Toronto. That night, I told Sally that while I was in Toronto, I found that I felt much better if I slept in an armchair. My upholstered armchair was downstairs in my den, so I spent the night there, never intending to sleep in her bed again. The next morning was Sunday, and we all went to church as usual. I hadn't forgotten the other cheating participant who ruined my life, and I was going to make sure he knew it was over. That day, the family was sitting in the front pew, although we usually sat somewhere in the middle. I stared at the preacher for a whole hour while we listened to his sermon. Sweat was rolling off his smug forehead. He didn't look me in the eye the whole time we were there. I made sure that we were the last to leave the chapel that day. I wanted to be the last person he shook hands with. When it was my turn in line, I gripped his hand in an iron grip and kept squeezing when he winced in obvious pain. I leaned over and whispered, "Don't ever come within sight of my family again, or I'll nail you to the cross above the altar and set this fucking house of God on fire." The shock on his face told me that he had heard my wise words. He knew that I meant every word I said. The preacher packed up and left town before the end of the week. I resumed taking my medication. My heart was already suffering, so there was no need to endure back pain. I'm sure she noticed that something had changed between us, but maybe she just chalked it up to my guilt that I couldn't do anything in bed. You might think that it would be impossible to live in the same house with someone you no longer loved. I agree with you. It was difficult, but not impossible. If you do this long enough and think hard enough about it, you will be able to find an answer for any situation. Besides, my medical problems have an advantage. You can use fatigue and pain to solve a variety of situations. I remembered all the special days, such as anniversaries and birthdays, and always left a little code at the bottom of the YFC postcard. Sally asked me one day, after reading her birthday card, what those letters meant. I told her it meant, "Yours forever, Charlie." I'll tell you what it really means. You're a fool. In all the years since Sally cheated on me, I've never slept in the same room with her. I only returned to the church for my children's weddings, telling Sally that the wooden pews were too hard to sit on for a long period of time. I've never told anyone about the secret I've been keeping inside myself for the last 20 years. All this was done out of the only love that remained in me, and all this for the sake of my children. Right now, I have only a few minutes left to live. I can feel it. My family is gathered around me now. For the most part, I've led a good life. I saw all my children graduate from college and start their own families. All of them have grown up and lead happy lives. That in itself was enough to make me go to my grave a happy man. Once or twice over the years, the idea of getting a divorce has crossed my mind. Sally cheated on me. It was a deliberate act of betrayal that I have never forgiven and will never forgive. For the first 20 years of our life together, I gave her all the love a man should give. For the last 20 years, I've been just the man Sally once married. My body lived in the same house that we worked so hard for, but my mind and heart were somewhere in the past. I never found out if Sally cheated on me a few times. It really didn't matter. The results would have been the same anyway. My children would lose respect for one of us if the truth about what Sally did was revealed to them. They would hate what their mother did, but they probably would like me to give her another chance. No matter how much I loved them, I wouldn't have given her that chance. The pain and humiliation were too deep. Their wishes would have been rejected, and my family would have come apart at the seams. I chose the path, right or wrong, so that the family unit would remain intact and strong. The children's mother and I could be loved and treated with respect equally. Saying goodbye to your children for the last time is very hard and sad. I told each of them how much I love them and how proud I really am of them. I hugged and kissed them all goodbye and asked them to give me some time alone with their mother while there was still time. I still had a lot to tell my so-called wife. There was less and less time, and I was getting weaker by the minute. Over the past few weeks, I've made a decision about my little secret. Sally, please come closer. It becomes very difficult for me to speak. She pulled her chair closer to the bed. Don't try to talk, darling. You need to rest. No, Sally, there's something very important to me that you should know. For 20 years you have been my wife, my lover, and my best friend. Oh, Charlie, you know we've been married for 40 years, not 20. That's right. And for the first 20 years you were all that and more to me. But for the last 20 years, you've been just another cheater who cheated on her husband, I said hoarsely. You? Did you know? Yes, I came home early from that business trip to Toronto. I saw you. It's still hard for me to think about that day. Please, Charlie, I'm sorry. I don't want you to meet your creator that way. Oh God, I'm so sorry. To hell with your God, I said as loudly as I could. Charlie, no, please don't do this to me. Let me explain. Please, Charlie, I've only been tempted once. Please forgive me. I'm begging you. Sally, I've been keeping this secret locked inside all these years. I never talked about it to spare the children. Now this is your secret to live with, and I hope that you will live to a very, very old age. Charlie, please, you have to forgive me before you die. Don't do this to me. If I've ever meant anything to you, please, Charlie, please, she said softly through her tears. Sally, one last thing. Now that I don't have to be nice to you, could you please get the fuck out of my sight? I moaned on my last breath,